The fluorescent lights of the Lakeside Preserve Estates Community Clubhouse conference room hummed with a sterile, indifferent buzz. Ronald Keltner stood at the cheap laminate podium, his posture as straight and unyielding as the flagpole on his property. It was October 12th. He was here to dispute a courtesy notice from the Architectural Control Committee. "And as you can see from the manufacturer's specifications," Ron said, his voice calm and even as he gestured to the projector screen behind him. "The solar panels have a non-reflective, matte black finish. They are rated at less than 2% reflectivity, which is well below the threshold for glare interference outlined in the community's own design guidelines." Appendix C, page 14. He had come prepared. He had data sheets, installation receipts, and a printed copy of the relevant guidelines with the key passage highlighted. He expected a simple, logical resolution. Across the long table sat the 5 members of the ACC, but his focus was on the woman at the center, Karen Mayfield, president of the Lakeside Preserve HOA Board of Directors. She wasn't technically on the ACC, but she attended every meeting as an ex officio advisor. She wore a crisp navy blazer, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun. Her smile was a thin, unmoving line. She let the silence hang for a moment after he finished, then tapped a manicured finger on the stack of papers in front of her. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Keltner. However, the committee has a procedural question." She didn't look at the committee. She looked directly at him. "The application form you submitted for this modification was Form 7B. Revision 4.2 correct?" Ron blinked. "Yes, that's the form the management company's website provided." Karen's smile tightened by a millimeter. "I see. Unfortunately, as of September 1st, the board approved an updated version, Revision 4.3. All applications submitted after that date on the obsolete form are considered invalid. The committee cannot rule on an invalid application." A quiet shuffle of papers rippled down the table. One of the committee members, a nervous-looking man in a golf shirt, cleared his throat. "Karen, the website might not have been updated. Procedural integrity is the bedrock of this community." "Bill." She cut him off, her tone still honey-sweet, but now edged with steel. She turned back to Ron. "Your solar array is therefore, by definition, an unapproved architectural modification. You'll need to resubmit on the correct form. In the meantime, the structure is in violation. The committee upholds the notice." Ron stood motionless, processing the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it. It wasn't about the panels. It wasn't about glare or aesthetics. It was a demonstration. He had brought facts. She had brought a technicality, and her technicality had won. "The decision is final, Mr. Keltner," Karen said, already gathering her papers. "You'll receive a formal notice from the management company in due course. Next item on the agenda, the Henderson's unapproved mailbox flag." Ron didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply packed his documents back into his leather satchel with precise, economical movements. He had learned long ago that some battles are not won on the field they are presented on. As he walked out of the humming, fluorescent room, he felt a cold clarity settle over him. This wasn't a disagreement. This was the opening move in a campaign. He left not with anger, but with a quiet, grim understanding of the war to come. The next morning, October 13th, the air over the lake was sharp and clean. A thin layer of mist clung to the water's surface, and the rising sun cast long, cool shadows through the tall pines that lined his 8.5 acres. This was the peace Ron had bought, the quiet he had earned after 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. It was the place he and his late wife, Sarah, had designed on paper napkins and dreamed about during his last deployment. A place with enough space to breathe, Ron. No close neighbors. Just us and the water. He stood on the deck he'd built with his own hands, a mug of black coffee warming his palms. The house, a simple, modern design of cedar and glass, sat nestled into the landscape, a quiet observer of the lake. The solar panels on the roof were a dark, unobtrusive grid, silently doing their job. From here, they were barely visible. This land, this house, was more than property. It was a promise kept. Inside, his home office was a testament to his methodical nature. On one wall hung a large, framed plat map of his property, Lot 41D. It was the official survey he'd commissioned before closing, a beautiful, intricate document of contour lines and legal boundaries. If one looked closely, a faint, dotted line cut across the northeast corner of the property. Far from the house, it was labeled in tiny, precise letters, Utility and View Easement for benefit of Common Area Lot B. He remembered the title agent explaining it a standard clause, ensuring the utility company could access their lines, and that no one could build a 10-story tower blocking the view from the small community park, a quarter-mile down the shore. It seemed innocuous. On his desk sat a thick, white binder labeled Lakeside Preserve Estates, governing documents, when he'd bought the land. It was an unincorporated parcel. A year later, the adjacent development, Lakeside Preserve, had expanded its boundaries, and his property was incorporated into the HOA's jurisdiction. His lawyer had assured him it was mostly a formality for road maintenance and septic standards. He'd read the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, cover to cover, a habit from years of reviewing contracts and engineering specs. He opened the binder now, his fingers finding a yellow sticky note he'd placed long ago. It marked WAR 8.4.2, View Corridor, Maintenance and Aesthetic Harmony. He read the vaguely worded clause again. No structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain upon any lot which may damage or interfere with any established easement for the enjoyment of the aesthetic view from any common area, as determined in the sole discretion of the board of directors. He'd thought it subjective then, a potential nuisance, but had dismissed it. In the margins, he'd simply written vague. Watch. A third item was tacked to the corkboard above his desk, a brightly colored flyer announcing the HOA's annual meeting on November 30th. He'd planned on ignoring it. Now, it seemed less like an invitation and more like a deadline. His laptop chimed. A video call from Mike Sanderson, his old friend from the JAG Corps. Mike's face, framed by a sterile government office, filled the screen. "So, how'd the battle of the solar panels go?" Mike asked, a wry grin on his face. Ron recounted the meeting, the procedural trap, Karen Mayfield's cold, triumphant smile. It was a professional hit. Mike. She didn't want to discuss the issue. She wanted to establish dominance. Mike leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin. Classic playbook. Drown them in bureaucracy. Make it more trouble to fight than to comply. So what's her endgame? She can't really care about a few panels you can't even see from the road. I don't know, Ron admitted. But it's not about the panels. It's about something else. She was testing the perimeter, seeing if I'd fold. And you didn't, Mike stated, not as a question. Okay, Ron, remember the rules of this kind of engagement. Fight the war on paper, not in the field. Document everything, every email, every letter, every phone call, timestamps, certified mail. Create a paper trail so clean and so thorough that by the time you get to the real fight, you've already won. Way ahead of you, Ron said, gesturing to the file folder he'd already labeled Karen Mayfield, LP HOA. Good. Stay calm. Stay methodical. And for God's sake, Don't give her an excuse to call the cops on you for losing your temper. Let her be the one who makes the mistakes. After the call, Ron sat in his quiet office, the silence of the woods pressing in. He looked at the photo of Sarah on his desk, her smile bright and hopeful. He was a man who had built bridges under fire and designed forward operating bases in the middle of nowhere. He was not going to be driven from his own home by a woman armed with a 3-ring binder and a procedural loophole. The letter arrived on October 19th. It wasn't a casual note left on his door. It was a formal, intimidating package delivered by the U.S. Postal Service, requiring a signature, the green certified mail slip, with its long, unique tracking number, 7018 390 001 4722 9104, was the first sign that this was no longer a courtesy. This was a legal action. The envelope bore the letterhead of the HOA's management company, Prestige Community Management, and was addressed to the occupant, 41D Lakeside Preserve. Not to Mr. Keltner, to the occupant. The depersonalization was deliberate. Another small, calculated move to undermine his standing. Inside, the document was titled Formal Notice of Violation. The language was cold, precise, and weaponized. It cited his property not by address, but by parcel number. It stated that, following the Architectural Control Committee meeting of October 12th, the structure commonly known as solar panel array was found to be in violation of the governing documents. It then went further. The letter didn't just mention the solar panels. It had a second point, one that made the blood in his veins run cold. Furthermore, a recent review of the community plat map has revealed a significant and ongoing violation of CC&R, GOR 8.4.2, view corridor maintenance, and aesthetic harmony. The placement of your boat dock, attached walkway, and associated shoreline alterations riprap. Clearing of native vegetation substantially infringes upon the designated view corridor easement for the benefit of Common Area Lot B Community Park. This unapproved shoreline modification obstructs the natural aesthetic and intended panoramic enjoyment from the common area. It was a breathtaking escalation. They were using the vague aesthetic harmony clause and the minor utility easement on the far corner of his property to attack the very heart of his life here, his dock, his access to the lake, the dock that had been there when he bought the property, grandfathered in and fully permitted by the county. The notice concluded with a list of demands. He had 30 days from the date of the letter to cure the violations. This included 1. Immediate removal of the unapproved solar panel array. 2. Submission of a formal architectural plan for the complete removal of the offending dock and shoreline alterations. 3. Replanting of the shoreline with native species as approved by the ACC. Failure to comply would result in a fine of $100 per violation. Per day, retroactive to the date of the notice. He was also informed of his right to request a hearing before the Board of Directors within 14 days. Ron laid the letter on his desk. The solar panels had been a feint, a test. This was the real attack. They weren't just trying to control his property. They were trying to amputate it from the lake. He picked up his phone and took a high-resolution photo of the letter. He attached it to an email and sent it to Mike. The subject line was simple: "They've declared war." This certified letter was the line in the sand. It was no longer a suggestion or a petty disagreement over a form. It was a formal, documented challenge to his right to live on his land as he saw fit. The slow, bureaucratic siege had begun. Ron followed Mike's advice to the letter. He would engage through official channels first, building his paper trail brick by brick. On October 20th, he drafted a polite, Factual email to the generic address for Prestige Community Management. He attached a scanned PDF of his county-approved dock permit from 5 years prior and a copy of the grandfather clause from the HOA's own documents, which exempted pre-existing structures. He formally requested a hearing with the board, as was his right. The response he received 24 hours later was an automated reply. "Thank you for your message. A representative will be in contact with you within 3 to 5 business days." 5 business days came and went. Silence. He sent a follow-up email. Another automated reply. He called the management company's main line. After navigating a labyrinthine phone tree, he was put on hold for 15 minutes, serenaded by a tinny instrumental version of a forgotten 80s pop song, before being transferred to a voicemail box that was, of course, full. This was the second layer of the attack: bureaucratic attrition. They wouldn't engage with his facts because they didn't have to. They would simply ignore him, letting the 30-day compliance clock tick down while the fines began to accrue. Then, on October 28th, the war opened on a new front. A white county-owned pickup truck rolled down his driveway. A man in a collared shirt with a Summit County Code enforcement patch on the sleeve stepped out, holding a clipboard. "Afternoon," the man said, looking more tired than aggressive. "Had an anonymous complaint about an illegal burn pile and potential septic leakage on this parcel." Ron felt a surge of adrenaline, but he kept his expression neutral. "There's no burn pile, and my septic system was inspected and certified by your department 6 months ago. I have the paperwork." "I'm sure you do, sir," the inspector said wearily, "but a complaint was filed, so I have to look. Just routine." For the next hour, Ron walked the inspector around his pristine property. They looked at the non-existent burn pile. They inspected the sealed septic tank lids. The inspector took some photos, made some notes, and finally sighed. "Everything looks clean to me, Mr. Keltner. Exactly like the last report. Sorry to waste your time. We've been getting a lot of these anonymous calls lately out here." He didn't elaborate, but the look he gave Ron was one of weary sympathy. He knew exactly what was happening. Ron thanked him and watched him drive away. The complaint wasn't meant to stick. It was meant to harass. It was designed to force him onto the defensive, to make him waste a day dealing with a baseless accusation, to create an official record, however spurious, of problems at his property. Karen was expanding her arsenal, using the county's own systems as a weapon against him. He documented the entire visit, including the inspector's name and the time of his arrival and departure. He sent a summary to Mike, who replied with a single-line textbook. "She's trying to create a pattern of nuisance. It's a classic tactic in a war of attrition." Ron sat on his deck, the quiet of the lake now feeling less like peace and more like the calm before a storm. He had tried to play by the rules, but his opponent was rewriting the rulebook, using invisible armies and anonymous complaints. It was clear now that he couldn't win this fight alone or through official channels that were designed to exhaust him. He needed intelligence. He needed to know what Karen's real objective was. He needed to find someone who knew how to dig. On November 1st, Ron drove into town to meet Eleanor Vance. She was a retired title agent and paralegal, a name Mike had given him. Ellie's forgotten more about Summit County property records than most lawyers will ever know. Mike had said, "She lives for this stuff." Her office was a cramped, dusty space above a hardware store, filled with filing cabinets and stacks of manila folders that seemed to defy gravity. Eleanor herself was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of bifocals and a no-nonsense demeanor. Ron laid out the entire story, presenting her with his meticulously organized folder, the courtesy notice, the formal violation, the certified mail receipt, the email chain with the management company, his dock permit, and a detailed log of the code enforcement visit. She listened without interruption, her fingers steepled, her eyes scanning each document as he passed it to her. When he finished, she tapped a pen on her notepad. "Karen Mayfield," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "Of course, she's been playing SimCity with this county's zoning laws for a decade. Ambitious woman." She picked up the violation notice. "This isn't about a view. Figure 8.4.2 is a boilerplate aesthetics clause. It's legally flimsy as a wet napkin when you apply it to a pre-existing, permitted structure. No, this is a pretext. She wants something." "That's what I need to find out," Ron said. "Well, the first step in any war is to get the enemy's battle plans," Eleanor said, a glint in her eye. "Under state law, as a homeowner, you have the right to inspect the association's official records. We'll start there. I want the board meeting minutes for the last 12 months, the current financials, and a copy of the original developer turnover documents. Let's see what they've been talking about when they think no one is listening." She drafted a formal records request on her own letterhead, citing the specific state statutes that compelled the HOA to comply within 10 business days. Ron sent it to Prestige Community Management via both certified mail and email. For 9 days, there was only silence. Then, on the 10th and final day, a thick envelope arrived. It contained a stack of papers, but as Ron and Eleanor spread them out on her cluttered desk, the problem became immediately clear. The documents were a masterclass in obstructive compliance. The financial statements were high-level summaries, lacking any detailed expense reports, and the board minutes. They were heavily, almost comically, redacted. Entire pages were streaked with thick black bars. Under the heading, October Board Meeting, the agenda item following ACC Violations Report was completely blacked out. Under New Business, a section titled Lakefront Access Proposal, Executive Session Discussion was an entire page of solid black ink. Well, Eleanor murmured, holding a page up to the light as if she could pierce the redactions with sheer willpower. They're not just hiding something. They're advertising it. The stonewalling was a confirmation. Karen's plan, whatever it was documented in those minutes. She was hiding a specific proposal related to lakefront access, and it was almost certainly connected to his property. "She thinks this will stop us," Ron said, looking at the blacked-out pages. Eleanor smiled, a thin, wolfish grin. "Oh, bless her heart. She just told us exactly where to dig." The fight was no longer just about defending his dock. It was about uncovering the conspiracy hidden behind those black bars. Eleanor Vance had a network built over 40 years of navigating county bureaucracy. She knew the clerks, the archivists, and the retired surveyors. She knew that before an HOA can have a formal executive session to discuss sensitive matters, the general topic often has to be noted in public-facing documents, even if the details are hidden. "She's sloppy," Eleanor told Ron over the phone on November 8th. "Amateurs always get sloppy when they think they're being clever." Eleanor had spent 2 days in the dusty basement of the county recorder's office, pulling the original developer filings for the Lakeside Preserve Estates expansion. Tucked away in a supplementary planning document from 2 years prior, a boring, technical file concerning septic system capacities, she found it. It was a preliminary proposal, submitted by the HOA and later withdrawn, that outlined a plan to build a large, public access boat launch and marina. The proposed location, Common Area Lot B, the small park down the shore from Ron. The proposal included a feasibility study, and in that study was the key. It stated that for the marina to be commercially viable, it required a wide, straight access path from the main road down to the water for trailered boats. The most direct, geographically feasible, and cost-effective path for that access road cut directly through the northeast corner of a single private property, Lot 41D, Ron's property. But the plan was withdrawn. Ron said, confused. Exactly. Eleanor's voice crackled with triumph. They couldn't get the easement legally. The county wouldn't grant them eminent domain over private land for a commercial-style project. So Karen pulled the official plan and switched to another strategy. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Karen wasn't trying to get him to remove his dock for the view. She was trying to establish HOA control over the easement on his property. If she could prove through a pattern of sustained compliance enforcement that the HOA had dominion over that strip of land, she could then argue for its expanded use. She wasn't trying to take his land. She was trying to make his life so unbearable with fines and violations that he would be forced to either grant a wider access easement or, even better, sell the property at a discount to an LLC she controlled. The real bombshell landed 2 days later. An unmarked envelope appeared in Eleanor's office mail slot. Inside was a single USB drive and a note written on a napkin. Some of us still believe in doing the right thing. AF. The drive contained a single PDF file, the unredacted board minutes from the October meeting. Eleanor called Ron immediately. You need to see this. Now. In her office, they opened the file. The black bars were gone. The section under New Business was revealed in stark, damning detail. New Business, Lakefront Access Proposal, Executive Session Discussion. K. Mayfield presented an update on the Clearwater Development Group partnership. Clearwater has reaffirmed their interest in funding and constructing the community marina project, contingent on the HOA securing the necessary access easement through Lot 41D. Legal counsel advises that a direct purchase or eminent domain action is not viable. K. Mayfield outlined the alternative strategy sustained compliance enforcement on Lot 41D, leveraging CC&R for 8.4.2 to establish HOA authority over the easement corridor. The objective is to create sufficient financial and legal pressure on the current occupant to compel a negotiated easement transfer or a distressed sale. Motion to proceed with the compliance strategy, beginning with the unapproved shoreline modifications. Motion carried, 4-1. There it was. A premeditated board-approved conspiracy to use the HOA's power to force a homeowner off his land for the benefit of a private developer. The initials AF on the napkin almost certainly belonged to the lone dissenting vote. Ron stared at the screen, a cold, hard anger solidifying in his chest. This was never about solar panels or aesthetic harmony. It was a calculated, fraudulent shakedown. He was no longer just defending his home. He was a witness to a crime. Well, Ron, Eleanor said softly, looking over her glasses at him. The good news is, you're not playing defense anymore. It's time to go on the attack. Karen Mayfield must have sensed the shift in the wind. Perhaps her informant on the board told her about the leak. Or perhaps she simply realized that Ron wasn't folding as expected. Her response was swift and brutal. She deployed the HOA's ultimate weapon. On November 15th, another certified letter arrived. This one wasn't from the management company. It was from a high-priced law firm in Seattle. The letterhead was thick, expensive bond paper. The tone was glacial. Subject notice of intent to record a line. The letter stated that, due to his failure to cure the violations outlined in the notice of October 19th, his account was now delinquent in the amount of $5,400, $100 per day, for 2 violations over 27 days. It informed him that if the full amount, plus attorney's fees, was not paid within 30 days, The Lakeside Preserve Estates Homeowners Association would record a continuing lien against his property. Lot 41D. This was the real threat. An HOA lien clouds the property's title, making it impossible to sell or refinance. It damages credit scores and, most terrifyingly, in their state, an HOA could eventually foreclose on a property to satisfy the lien, even if the homeowner owned it outright and was current on their mortgage. They were threatening to take his home over a manufactured dispute about a dock and some solar panels. Ron immediately forwarded a scan to Eleanor and Mike. Mike's response was blunt. "This is the kill shot. Ron, they're trying to force you into a settlement. Do not engage with them directly. Let your legal team handle it." Eleanor began drafting a cease and desist letter to the HOA's attorneys, citing the evidence of fraud and conspiracy. But she warned him it might not be enough to stop the process. They'll claim their actions are valid until a court tells them otherwise. They're betting they can break you before we ever see a judge. That evening, as dusk settled over the lake, Ron received a phone call from a blocked number. He almost didn't answer, but some instinct told him to. "Mr. Keltner." The voice was quiet, nervous, and belonged to an older man. "This is he." "My name is Arthur Finch. I'm on the board. I was the dissenting vote." Ron's grip tightened on the phone. F. The man who had leaked the minutes. "Thank you for what you did, Mr. Finch," Ron said carefully. "I didn't do it for you," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly. "I did it because this has gone too far. Karen, she's out of control. I wanted to warn you. That lion notice isn't a bluff. She held an emergency meeting this afternoon. She's pushing the lawyers to accelerate the timeline. She's actually talking about foreclosure. She told the board it would be cleaner if the HOA could acquire the property at auction." The casual cruelty of it was staggering. They weren't just trying to pressure him. They were actively planning to take his home. "She's convinced she's untouchable," Arthur continued. "She keeps talking about the annual meeting on the 30th. She plans to present the marina project as a done deal, a huge win for the community, and use the momentum to get re-elected as president. You have to do something, Mr. Keltner. She's going to ruin this community. She's going to ruin people." The call ended. Ron stood in the dark, the lights of his house reflecting on the still water of the lake. The intent to lien was an imminent, existential threat. The annual meeting was Karen's planned coronation. It was also, he now realized, the perfect battlefield. He had the intelligence. He had the evidence. And now, he had a deadline. He had 15 days to prepare for the fight of his life. The community clubhouse was packed on the evening of November 30th. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and suburban anxiety. Over 100 homeowners from Lakeside Preserve Estates sat in tightly packed rows of folding chairs, clutching copies of the meeting agenda. Karen Mayfield sat at the head table on a slightly raised dais, looking regal and composed, flanked by her board members. Arthur Finch sat at the far end, pale and tense, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Ron had secured a 5-minute slot during the homeowner open forum at the end of the meeting, a time usually reserved for complaints about dog waste and speeding cars. He sat in the second row, his leather satchel at his feet, his demeanor calm and focused. For an hour, he listened as Karen guided the meeting with practiced ease. She reported on community finances, praised the landscaping committee, and announced a new holiday decorating contest. She was charming, efficient, and completely in control. Finally, she arrived at the open forum. "Next, we have Mr. Ronald Keltner of Lot 41D, she announced, a flicker of something cold in her eyes. Mr. Keltner, you have 5 minutes to address the community. Our secretary will keep time. A large red digital timer was projected onto the screen behind her, its numbers glowing WO500. Ron walked to the podium. He placed his laptop on the lectern and connected it to the projector. He looked out at the faces in the crowd, curious, bored, a few openly hostile. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the room. "My name is Ron Keltner. Most of you don't know me. I like my privacy. Unfortunately, the actions of your board have forced me to become very public." The timer clicked to "For the past 6 weeks, I have been the target of a systematic campaign of harassment by this board, under the direction of President Mayfield." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's smile remained fixed. "It began with a baseless violation for my solar panels," Ron continued, "but it quickly escalated. I was sent a formal notice demanding the removal of my county-permitted boat dock, citing a vague rule about aesthetic harmony." He clicked a button, and the image of the formal violation notice filled the screen. "The board claimed my dock interfered with a view corridor easement. This is that easement." The screen changed to an aerial view of his property. He highlighted the official plat map, showing the faint dotted line in the far corner of his lot. "As you can see, the legal easement is over 200 yards from my dock. It's a narrow strip for utility access, not a panoramic vista. The board's interpretation is, to put it mildly, a fabrication." When I tried to resolve this, I was ignored. Then, anonymous, false complaints were filed against me with county code enforcement. And when that didn't work, the board's attorneys sent me this. Another click. The menacing header of the notice of intent to lay in appeared on screen. "They are threatening to take my home." The murmurs grew louder. People were sitting up, looking from the screen to Karen, whose smile was now gone, replaced by a tight, angry line. "Why would the board go to such lengths over a dock?" Ron asked the room. I wondered that myself. So I did some research. As a homeowner, I requested the board's meeting minutes. This is what they gave me. The screen now showed the heavily redacted minutes, black bars obscuring entire pages. Looks like they have something to hide, doesn't it? Fortunately, the truth has a way of coming out. Another click. The screen split, showing the redacted minutes on one side and the unredacted version on the other. He zoomed in on the damning paragraph. He read it aloud. "Sustained compliance enforcement on Lot 41D to compel a negotiated easement transfer or a distressed sale for the benefit of Clearwater Development Group's Marina project." The room erupted. Shouts of "What and is this real?" echoed off the walls. Karen was on her feet. "This is out of order. You are presenting illegally obtained documents." "These documents were filed with the county," Ron said calmly over the noise, which was a slight embellishment, but true in spirit. "This isn't about a dock or a view. It's about this board conspiring to force me out of my home to make way for a commercial developer." The timer showed. "This is fraud," he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing the chaotic room back to him. "It is a betrayal of your trust and an abuse of power." He had more to say, a concluding statement about community and integrity. But before he could, Arthur Finch stood up, his face ashen. "He's right, but there's more you need to know." All eyes turned to Arthur. "To fund the initial legal actions and the fraudulent survey that started this," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "Karen didn't use the general budget. She took out a line of credit in the HOA's name. And she had our oldest board member, Mrs. Gable, co-sign it. Mrs. Gable is 87 and has dementia. She didn't know what she was signing." This was the secondary moral twist. A wave of genuine shock and horror washed over the room. It was one thing to strong-arm a capable veteran. It was another to exploit a vulnerable old woman. Ron looked at the timer. His planned victory speech was irrelevant now. He saw the path Karen had laid for him: sue the HOA for massive damages, bankrupt the association. In doing so, he would financially ruin the innocent Mrs. Gable, whose personal assets were now tied to the fraudulent credit line. That was Karen's final, poisoned arrow. The timer flashed red. His time was up. Ron looked from Arthur to the horrified faces in the crowd, then to Karen, whose face was a mask of pure fury. He had a choice: total, crushing victory, or justice tempered with mercy. He leaned into the microphone. "Therefore," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "I am not asking for damages. I am asking this community to take back control. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in President Mayfield and this board. I call for an independent forensic audit of this association's finances. And I call for a freeze on all liens and legal actions until that audit is complete. Let's protect our most vulnerable. And let's clean our own house." He had turned the moral dilemma back on them, offering a path that punished the guilty while protecting the innocent. The room was silent for a beat. And then, from the back, a single homeowner stood up and started to applaud. Then another, and another. The clubhouse descended into organized chaos. A homeowner who identified herself as a corporate lawyer stood on a chair and formally moved for a vote of no confidence in the entire board. Another seconded it. The representative from Prestige Community Management, a young man who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole, stammered that such a vote was not on the agenda. "We're making it the agenda," someone shouted from the back. Arthur Finch, now emboldened, made a motion to immediately freeze the lien against Lot 41D and to launch an independent audit, specifically to investigate the credit line co-signed by Mrs. Gable. The motion passed with a roar of ayes. Karen Mayfield stood frozen at the head table, her face a pale, rigid mask of disbelief. Her power had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. The board members beside her were already distancing themselves, whispering frantically to one another. She had been censured by the court of public opinion. Ron packed his laptop, the applause still ringing in the room. He felt a quiet, profound sense of relief. As he made his way toward the exit, homeowners reached out to shake his hand, to clap him on the shoulder, their faces a mixture of gratitude and anger at having been so thoroughly deceived. He saw Karen slipping out a side door and followed her. She was standing in the cool night air of the parking lot, illuminated by a single lamppost, furiously typing on her phone. She looked up as he approached. "You think you've won," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You've destroyed this community, all that progress, the property values I built. You've torn it all down out of sheer selfishness." Ron stopped a few feet from her. He felt no anger, only a kind of weary pity. "You did this, Karen. You confused stewardship with ownership. You thought this community was yours to control, and you were willing to ruin a person's life for a backroom deal with a developer. I didn't destroy anything. I just turned on the lights." She stared at him, her jaw tight, searching for a retort that wouldn't come. For the first time, she looked small and defeated. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving her alone in the cone of light. Weeks later, the dust had settled. The forensic audit confirmed everything Ron had revealed, and more. It uncovered a pattern of financial misconduct, secret negotiations with Clearwater Development, and the unethical exploitation of Mrs. Gable. The results were submitted to the state attorney general. Karen Mayfield and 2 of her closest board allies were recalled in a special election. With over 90% of the community voting for their removal, Prestige Community Management was fired. The new interim board, which included a reluctant Arthur Finch, formally expunged all violations and fines against Ron's property and issued him a public, written apology, which was mailed to every homeowner. The final surprise, however, was a constructive one. The HOA's directors and officers' liability insurance, forced to pay out to avoid a massive lawsuit, settled with Ron. He accepted a modest sum to cover his legal fees, with one condition, at his suggestion. The bulk of the settlement money was not paid to him, but was instead used to establish a community legal defense fund, a resource for any homeowner who felt they were being unfairly targeted by future boards. Ron, now seen as a reluctant community leader, worked with the interim board to draft a homeowners' Bill of Rights amendment to the bylaws. It mandated greater financial transparency, put strict limits on the board's fining power, and established a simple, clear process for appealing violations. On a crisp December afternoon, Ron stood on his dock, watching the winter sun glint off the cold, clear water, the promise he'd made to Sarah a place to breathe. A place of peace had been threatened, but it had endured. He had fought a war on paper and won, not just for himself, but for the entire community. His land was quiet again, the silence no longer fragile, but earned and solid. He had his peace back, and he had made sure no one else would have to fight so hard for theirs again.